Hello, it's Professor Cicerelli. So I just wanted to re-go over some of the things we spoke about yesterday in class, and then discuss some of the things we're going to talk about today, and some of it being a continuation from yesterday. Obviously, we're not in class today, but we're going to go over, especially annotating. I definitely want to go over annotating again with you, and maybe give you some more specifics about annotating, and then use some of what we talk about with annotating to look at two different narrative descriptive essays, more specifically narrative descriptive essays that are also literacy autobiographies. We spoke yesterday about what a literacy autobiography is. An autobiography is you writing about you telling a story, a narrative, descriptive narrative about yourself. And the literacy aspect of it is how you came to be the reader and the writer that you are today, what that journey entailed, for better or for worse. Were there good parts about that journey? Were there people along the way that made that difficult, who made that easy? Were there other obstacles? Maybe you had a bad teacher along the way. Were there things that you felt helped you? Was another language a help? Was it difficult because of another language? All of those things can be components of your literacy autobiography. And so we started looking at we really only looked at one example of a literacy autobiography, and it was Russell Baker's essay, and that was this one here. So I am looking at the subject and strategy book text online, and we started going through this. And this was an example I told you guys in class yesterday, that this is an example of a literacy autobiography where Baker is focusing on one person or one event that was really formative in his literacy. And he's telling us a narrative about himself. It's what makes it the autobiography part. So we started looking at that. We did a little bit of annotating. I had you guys looking in class just at a couple of paragraphs of this where we were looking at the first two paragraphs, I think, and we were looking specifically for places where we saw indications of narrative, where we saw those words that indicate passage of time or sequence. And we looked at words like we looked at phrases like until my third year of high school, when our class was assigned. And then we were also looking for and annotating places where we had description. A lot of this paragraph is made up of description, and it's engaging our five senses in describing what Mr. Flegel, Russell Baker's English teacher, what he looked like. So we went over that. Okay, so what I want to do today is maybe say a little more about annotating, because certainly annotating isn't just looking for places where there's narrative, places where there's description. That's part of it, but there's a lot more to annotating, and I expect everyone, whenever we read anything really, to do annotating, to mark up a text and make it your own. So let me jump to this. So here's a slide I made you on annotation. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that annotation can happen at three distinct times during the reading process. One will be before you read, during you read, and after you read. Okay. We spoke a little bit about before you read when we spoke in class yesterday about looking at the title, looking at the author's bio. Okay, your textbook your subject and strategy textbook makes a point of adding author's bio to every story, and then obviously having a title. What could you do by looking at an author's bio and the title? Well, use it to make predictions. Okay. Do I have any guesses about what the essay might be about based on its title? What judgments can I make? What judgments can I make about the story based on who the author is? You know, what do I know about the author? And from that, what can I infer anything? Can I assume anything? So using that, doing that. Okay. Another thing you could do, in addition to making predictions about the author, in addition to making predictions about the story based on the title, is skim for formatting. Now, I say skim because, you know, obviously this is before you read. You know, you're not actually reading. You are doing this before you read. But when I say skim for formatting, I mean, by flipping through the essay, just scanning through the pages, maybe not even reading the sentences or even scanning the words, can you tell just by the formatting of the essay whether it's going to be a narrative or whether it's going to be a more academic essay? Okay, so when I look at an essay, even just skimming it and not even reading it, I mean, just literally looking at the words on the page without even maybe reading what they are, I can tell if there's dialogue or not. And if there's dialogue, that probably means it's a story. Okay, so I can make, and if it's a story, that's probably telling me there are going to be characters in it. And then I could start making judgments about, is the author going to be one of those characters? Is this going to be fiction? Is this going to be nonfiction? So those are things, that's something I can look for. Or if I don't see dialogue and I just see block paragraphs, blocks and blocks of paragraphs, then maybe that's an indication to me that it's a more academic essay. If I see citations in it, okay, we'll talk about citations a lot next semester, but if I'm seeing citations at the end of paragraphs, that might also tell me that it's an academic essay. Okay, all these are things I can do before I actually start reading the essay. During the reading process, this is where I would say most of your annotating is going to happen during the reading process. Now you might be saying, Professor C, if I'm annotating and I'm doing all of this stuff during the reading process, isn't this going to disrupt my reading? Yeah, kind of. But I don't see it as much as disrupting the reading as making the reading active. And we sort of talked about this yesterday in class, that if all you're doing is moving through the paragraphs quickly, reading through the paragraphs quickly, getting to the end, how much of that are you really retaining, right? How much of that are you able to make connections to that? Do you understand how the paragraphs are put together if all you're doing is going from one paragraph to the next without really stopping to think about it? So while you are going to be doing most of your annotating during the reading process, and while it might seem disruptive to you, trust me, this is what makes your reading active. Okay, whoops, no. That says active. Oh no, I don't want to do that. Let's see if I could. No, don't want to do that. Let's bring that back. You're making it active. So let me fill that in. The reading becomes much more active that way. So what are some things you can do while you read or during the reading process? I would say, if you want to come up with a strategy for how you label each of these things, that's great. I know I told you guys in class that I tend to just, I'll make squiggly underlines when I read things. If I have vocabulary, I'll sort of circle a word I don't know and draw an arrow into the margin. But a lot, other people are more creative and will use color coding. Will use certain kinds of pens for the way they mark up while they read. I have one pen and I underline important things and then I highlight, I circle and draw arrows if I have words I don't know. But let's go through. So vocabulary. Vocabulary is definitely something to look for. Words that I don't know. If I come across words I don't know, two things I can do. Go right away to the dictionary, or maybe three things you could do. Go right away to the dictionary, look it up. Try to figure it out based on context. I'll talk a little more about that in a second. Try to figure it out by context. Or just keep reading and maybe, hopefully I will figure it out. Definitely don't do number three. Okay, if you come to a word you don't know, the solution is never, well, let me just keep reading and maybe I'll figure it out, because chances are you're probably not. And then if you don't understand what that word means, it might actually impact the way you read subsequent sentences. So I wouldn't just go right to the dictionary either. I wouldn't do that either. What I would do is try to figure out what the word means from context. How can I do that? The way you can do that is ask yourself. And we did this a little bit. If you're in my 10 o'clock class, we might have done this. Ask yourself, from context, does the word seem to be positive or does the word seem to be negative? Okay. Are there a lot of negative words clustering around this other word that I'm trying to define? So for example, in that first paragraph of the Russell Baker essay that we looked at yesterday, you might not have known what the word chloroform meant. Okay, but I wouldn't jump right to the dictionary and look that up. I would try to figure that out from context. Can I figure out what this word means from context? Is it positive or negative? Well, I mean, look at some of the words that are surrounding this word chloroform. Deadening, okay? Leaden, lackluster, lacking luster, not being shiny, lacking luster. Hated, the verb to hate. Dull and baffling. Left out heavy labor, agony. I mean, so look at all of these words, right? I don't think there's a positive word in the board. I left that one out too. So clustering around this word chloroform are a bunch of negative words: bored, dull, baffling, etc. So I could probably come to the conclusion that whatever chloroform is, it's not something good. It's not something uplifting. It's not something positive. When I look it up, I find out it's this sort of chemical that you can use to knock people out, or that's often see someone put on a handkerchief and knock somebody out with. I'm sure there are other uses for it. I'm sure that's not the only reason it was invented, but it's certainly negative, and I know that just if I'm reading carefully the context. Okay, so that's what I mean by trying to use the context to figure out what a word means. So vocabulary. Summarize. So another thing you can do while you're reading. You get to the end of the paragraph, see if you can, in not even a full sentence, not even a full sentence, see if you can summarize what's going on in that paragraph and write it in the margin. A couple of words that sum up what's going on in that paragraph. Okay. If you were in class yesterday, we read that paragraph that was describing Mr. Flegel. Okay. So what I might, and how the way he was dressed, his I think his hair, all this stuff. And what you could do right next to that paragraph, if we were summarizing and doing it and reading actively and annotating, what I could write is something like Flegel. I think I'm spelling his name right. Flegel physical description. Whoops. Okay. Just that, right in the margin, not even full sentence. That tells me, okay, physical description. I probably don't have a lot of narrative in this paragraph. That's what that would be telling me. But if I ever want to go back and refer to or find that paragraph where he's being described physically, I know what paragraph I can go to. Ask questions. something not making sense? Are you unsure why the author's saying something? Are you unsure maybe why the author included a certain detail, or why the author didn't include something? And write that question out in the margin with a question mark. Put that question right in the margin of what you're reading. Ask questions of what you're reading, because when we get to the third stage of annotation, we're going to come back and look and see if some of our questions have been answered. So write those questions down in the margin if you have them. My favorite thing to do while I'm reading is make connections. When I say make connections, do we see connections between what we're reading and something else we've read in class? It's the beginning of the semester, so we haven't read much else. But do I see connections to other things that we have read? Do I see connections to other classes? Okay. Do I see connections to my own life? Is something that the author is saying resonating with me? Is it reminding me of somebody I know? Those are all connections I could make while I read. And I would literally write on the paper, like Flegel, Flegel just reminds me of my uncle, or Flegel is like my chemistry teacher. Put that in the actual essay, right? Make those connections. One of the most satisfying situations for me when I was in college and grad school was being able to see connections between things in different classes. If my teacher in my English class said something that my philosophy teacher said later on, I'd go, oh my gosh, and that light bulb would go off. That was always a really satisfying moment. So insofar as you can make connections between things you read, you're much more likely to remember them. You're much more likely to be actively engaged with them and care about what you're reading. Okay? And the last thing is ask yourself about paragraph organization. Do I notice how these paragraphs are put together? How do they flow one into the other? Okay. How does paragraph 1 relate to paragraph 2? How does paragraph 3 relate to paragraph 1? So how are those paragraphs set up between themselves? So how do the paragraphs transition into each other? And then within the paragraph, how are my paragraphs set up? Where's my most important sentence in the paragraph? Usually it's at the beginning, but it might not be. We started looking at paragraph organization a little bit in class yesterday when we were looking at the Mr. Flegel essay. I pointed out in this paragraph that we have our first sentence is a narrative sentence. We know that from when our class was assigned. It's setting us at a specific time and place. But the rest of the paragraph is all description. So if we had to map out how this paragraph is organized, narrative sentence followed by a bunch of descriptive sentences. Okay, so that's what I mean. So not just how the paragraph is organized within itself, how is the paragraph organized, how the sentence is organized within the paragraph, but then how do those paragraphs transition? How do I go from paragraph 2 to paragraph 3? What's the relationship between paragraph 2 and paragraph 3? Okay. That's what you're doing during the reading, and it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but it's how you make the reading active. And then at the end of your reading, summarize. You will be summarizing each of the paragraphs in a couple of words. And then at the end of your reading, or when you're done reading, go back and in one sentence, summarize what you think the main purpose of the entire piece. What was the entire essay? What was the purpose of it? Make judgments. Your judgments and your opinions. Did I like it? Was it not so good? Did it start off good, then kind of go bad? Was the reading sort of slow? Was it boring? If it was boring, why do I think I was bored? All of those you can do after you read. Write them right on the actual piece you're annotating. And then go back and review your predictions. Add to this, review your predictions and review your questions. Okay. Did your predictions turn out to be right? The predictions that you had at the beginning of your reading, did they turn out to be right? Were your questions answered? If not, think about how we might go about answering them. Perhaps it was a question about what something meant that didn't get answered. Perhaps it was a question about why the author said something that maybe did get answered later. Okay, so that's all something you can do after you read. So this is the annotation process. It's not just sort of putting marks on the page. There's a lot more strategy to it. But like I said in class, it's to make the reading active, and it is to make the text personal to you, to personalize the text for yourself. Okay, so we looked at a few paragraphs from the. Let me just plug in my laptop so our battery doesn't die. We looked at a couple of paragraphs from the Mr. Flegel essay. We'll look at one or two more. I don't want to reread the whole thing for you, but I want you to notice and maybe compare this when we look at Christina's essay in a little bit, her literacy autobiography. Ask yourself, what was the reading experience like for both of them? Was one a more enjoyable read than the other? Was one a slower read than the other? And if one felt like it was slower, which one? And ask yourself maybe why that was. Okay, for me personally, one of these essays read much more slowly than the other. I won't tell you which one. Maybe we could talk about it next time I see you. But one of them definitely read more slowly than the other. And I want you to think maybe about why that is. Okay? And a clue, I think it has something to do with, how can I give you this clue without giving it away? I think the speed of the reading has something to do with the percentage of how many narrative sentences there are, how many narration or story sentences there are versus how many descriptive sentences there are. Generally speaking, stories with more description in them tend to be slower. There's more narration. There's more this, then this, then this, then this. It tends to read a little faster. Okay? So in reading both of these, ask yourself, which one had a faster pace to it? And then that might tell you that there are fewer just paragraphs of just pure description of it. Okay, so let's look at this paragraph here, paragraph 6. So we're talking about Mr. Flegel here. We're talking about his junior English class, which Russell Baker is in, and we notice in this paragraph, late in the year. What does that tell us? That tells us time and place. That tells us we have a narration sentence. Late in the year, we tackled the informal essay. The essay, don't you see, is the ... My mind went numb. So we have narrative sentence. Then we have a bit of dialogue. Okay. Is dialogue narration or description? It's narration. It's an event, right? It's somebody speaking. So it's another narrative sentence. My mind went numb. Another narration sentence. It's an event. It's happening right there in the classroom in that moment, right? He's saying this. So remember we said narration is this, then this, then this. So, I mean, look at those sentences. Mr. Flegel starts talking. The essay is blah, blah, blah. Russell Baker's mind goes numb as a result of him talking. So this happens, he starts talking, then mind goes numb. Okay? Of all forms of writing, none seems so boring as the essay. Descriptive. Naturally, we would have to write informal essays. Descriptive. Mr. Flegel distributed a homework sheet. Action, right? Narration. Mr. Flagel distributed a homework sheet offering us a choice of topics. None was quite so simple-minded as what I did on summer vacation, description. But most seemed to be almost as dull, description. I took the list home, action. And dawdled, sort of like, if we don't know what word dawdle means, sort of like procrastinated. Dawdled until the night before the essay was due, action. Sprawled on my sofa, I finally faced up to the grim task, action. So narrative here. Took the list out of my notebook and scanned it, more narration. Okay. The topic on which my eye stopped was the art of eating spaghetti. This one's tricky, but probably call this one narration too. So he takes out the book, he notices this topic, the art of eating spaghetti. So more narration. Okay. So the title produced an extraordinary sequence of mental events, or mental images, sorry, action. Right? So you could very easily take everything he's talking about, and most of the things he's talking about in this paragraph, saying, this happened, he took the essay home, then this happened, then he saw this, saw the title, then this happened. Okay? Then I thought about, I saw the title, then I thought about some things from my past, then I remembered this night where, with family where we were all eating spaghetti. All action, right? Okay. And it's all happening as he's sitting at home, pondering this, the essay topic. Right? So I want you to see as you're going through this that as Baker's essay picks up, as he's described Mr. Flagel in the beginning, we get some description. We get into a lot of narration. He starts really narrating this experience of getting this topic, what happened as a result of him getting the topic, what he wrote. Just quick, and then we'll jump to the other one. Suddenly, another time word, another narration word. Okay, so read the rest of the Baker essay. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but the way it turns out is Baker uses this topic, writes the essay that he is passionate about, thinking that it's going to be this big disaster, that the teacher's not going to like it because it didn't follow the right format, and then Mr. Flagel ends up loving it, and we see another scene, we see another narration of Baker in class. And teacher saying, now boys, I want to read you an essay. And then he's talking about Baker's essay. And he started to read, action. He was reading, more action. Somebody laughed, more action. Flagel stopped 2 or 3 times, more action. I did my best to avoid showing pleasure, action. Right? Or event, or an event, right? Something happening. So, and then Baker, realizes like, oh my gosh, maybe I really do have a passion for writing, and decides that this teacher and this particular assignment was really instrumental. Okay. So if I were picking apart and annotating each one of these paragraphs, I'd be looking for narration, description, making connections between paragraphs, etc. Let's turn to the Christina Lorimer essay. I want to look at that one with you. We won't go through the whole thing, but I want to look at least a couple of paragraphs. Okay. So she takes the other, as I mentioned to you, she takes the other approach to organizing a literacy autobiography. She's doing more of a historical overview here. Whoops. She is, from paragraph to paragraph, giving you an overview of all of the things that really shaped her literacy. Okay. And with this one, when we annotate this one, I want you to notice, when we can look for narration and description, but I also want you to see how does she go from paragraph to paragraph? What is, how is she transitioning? How are those paragraphs organized from paragraph to paragraph? And maybe along the way we'll see what she's up to. Maybe we'll realize that there's something a better way to organize it, etc. Okay, so let's start. So my literacy development started before bedtime. As a child, I loved Berenstain Bears, Dr. Seuss, and anything by Shel Silverstein. The Giving Tree, Caps for Sale, and Harold and the Purple Crayon topped my reading list, but my favorite was the Caterpillar book, whose pages were thick and hard to turn. My dad read to me in silly voices, and I fell asleep dreaming about my lovely life in Whoville. I went through a boxcar children phase, and later totally related to the Sweet Valley High series. Am I more like Jessica or Elizabeth? Eventually, I became mostly a silent reader, although to this day, I still adore and sometimes find more helpful reading out loud. Okay. So what do we notice about that first paragraph? We have a couple of phrases that start to indicate narration as a child. Eventually, to this day. But if you notice and you look at these sentences, look at the connection between these sentences. Are these sentences connected in time sequence, like some of the sentences were in the Russell Baker essay? So when I say, are they connected by time and sequence? Remember, imagine Russell Baker. He gets his assignment, his essay assignment. He looks at it. He notices the title. He thinks about this. He decides he's going to write. All of those things are connected in time and in sequence. Right? But if you look at this paragraph, it's, I love the Berenstain Bears, Dr. Seuss, The Giving Tree, or other things that they were on her reading list. But my favorite was the Caterpillar books. Let me get some description of what they looked like, etc. Dad read to me in silly voices. There's not really sequence here. There's not really a scene or an event here. She's describing to us what her dad would do. He'd read in silly voices. I'd fall asleep. Maybe some sequence there. He reads, she falls asleep. I went through a boxcar children phase. That's just another detail. That's just a detail. There is not a narration here. There's not a scene or an event happening here. Later, I totally was into the Sweet Valley High series. So mostly what we get in this opening paragraph is very good description, really good specific description. And that's the kind of thing that I want to see in your own literacy autobiography, that you're being good and specific. But most of what's going on in this paragraph is her describing to us. She is giving us a little bit of a sense of time for when these things happened, but mostly what's happening in this paragraph is descriptive. How does she transition to the next paragraph? What is the transition? Is it a transition in time? Like with Russell Baker, we got to class. The next paragraph is about what's going on in class. It's not really a transition in time. A way we know it's not a transition in time is she's telling us also. So it's an add-on. It's more description of what she was into when she was a kid. So she's really just also indicates to us this is just more description. And what's different about it is that she's now going to talk about writing. So she's transitioning to talk about writing, but the also tells us it's going to be more description. Okay. My first diary, here's what it looked like. My handwriting, here's what it looked like. From an early age, this looks like it might be a narration, but we don't really have a scene. She's just telling us, generally speaking, she obsessed about her handwriting. Okay. We don't actually see her in her house working on it. There's not a story here of her working on it. I loved making the bulbous letters. Okay. More description about her and about her writing. In the third grade, that's a time phrase. In third grade, I perfected my cursive. Okay, but what's the next sentence? My first diaries are 80% blank. Do we ever get to see a scene where she is in third grade working on her cursive? No, we don't ever get a scene. Okay, there isn't really much of a narrative here. Again, it's mostly descriptive. description of her writing. Okay? So not saying, I mean, so it's just different than Baker. It's different than Baker. Baker, I would say, is a little more of a mix of narration and description. And as you've read this, if you read this, I told you guys I wouldn't tell you earlier on that about which of these I found to be slower reading, but this one was much more of a slow read for me. And I don't mean slow in a bad way that it was, boring and I wanted to put it down, but the move from sentence to sentence was much slower because it wasn't a narrative of this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's more about just giving you lots of details to help you imagine yourself into the writer's position there. Out of other school reading, let's look at the let's jump down a little bit and we'll look at another paragraph transition. Let's jump down here. Out of school reading and writing practices took place in musical theater settings and piano classes. Okay, do we get to see a scene of the music in classes? Not really. I read scripts and music. I started acquiring and employing learning strategies like mnemonic devices. I also tells you I'm going to be giving you more detail. That's what also tells you. I also remember the kids program at church when I first started doing word searches. When you might go, okay, Professor C, that's a word. That's a time word. It is. But is she actually going to then go on and tell it? So it's the introduction. You're right. It's the introduction of specific time when I first started doing word searches and crossword puzzles. But you'll notice the very next sentence has nothing to do with her word searches and crossword puzzles. We know that because she's saying additionally. So now she's saying, okay, in addition to the detail I just gave you, here's another one. I was an avid note taker. Has nothing to do with the word searches and the crossword puzzles. So that tells you these two sentences, this one, and then additionally, they're not connected in time. They're not connected by sequence, this, then this. It's just more piling on of details. I shouldn't say piling on. That makes it seem like it's too much. I think it's just a good piece. So, but there's not a narrative. And part of the reason there's not really a narrative is because she's trying to cover lots and lots of time. And she starts when she was a kid reading picture books, and then moving on to by the time she gets to the end of this essay, she's in college. Okay? She's trying to cover lots of ground, and so if you're trying to cover lots of ground, you can't tell us stories about every single one of those details because you're going to write a novel then. So she's got to cover a lot of ground. So I understand why she's doing mostly description here. So she tells us about her out of school reading and writing. My dad must have foreseen the importance of this skill, the typing, and mandated that I practice my typing every day. Next paragraph. When I was younger, I was drawn to emotionally charged books. Okay. What's the transition here? Ask yourself what the transition here is. If there was one transition that I was maybe slightly critical of, it would be this one. Because I'm not sure if she's going, when she says when I was younger than when she was in this paragraph, or is she still talking about roughly the same period of time here? It's not, the transition here isn't super clear to me. So if there's one transition I would work on, it would be this one. So I was drawn to emotionally charged books like Number the Stars or The Diary of Anne Frank, and like most other children, loved entering the fantasy worlds of Narnia and A Wrinkle in Time. In junior high, I developed a strong distaste for reading. Okay, she goes from being drawn to these books to, I developed a strong distaste for reading. I was way too cool and concerned with boys. So this is an opportunity. This could, if she wanted to tell a story here about how she developed this distaste for reading, that could be a place where she does it, but she doesn't really give us or narrate the story to us of how she developed a distaste for reading. She just she gives it to us as just a detail. She tells it to us as a detail. Then Next paragraph, transition here. How are we transitioning? Do you notice it? Nice clean transition here. Okay, it's a transition in time sequence. Okay, she's telling us about junior high here, and then in the next paragraph she's telling us about high school. So we have a nice transition there. Okay, so if we were annotating this transition in time here. Okay, so this is what I mean by looking at the paragraph as a paragraph. How is it put together? What kind of sentences do we notice? And then what do we see going on between paragraphs? Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. That's for you to do as part of your assignment for today. I mean, unfortunately, we weren't in class to be able to do it together. But what you have before you are two models of how to do a literacy autobiography. Okay. Now, what you're going to do for the next time I see you in class, the next time I see you in class is going to be Wednesday. This coming Wednesday, that would be the 8th. Yes, the 8th of September. Okay. So the next time I see you in class, you will hopefully have your own literacy autobiography at that point. And let me just show you what I'm expecting for that. And by the way, I'm going to, these slides that I have here, I'll have these saved and I'll have them posted on our Blackboard for you. So here's your literacy autobiography. Here's what you need. It's going to be due Wednesday, September 8th at midnight. You're going to be submitting it through Blackboard. Okay. It's going to be due midnight, end of the day. Your formatting, you're going to submit to me either a Word document or a PDF, standard college format, size 12 font, double spaced, Times New Roman, nothing fancy there. Your requirements, at least 2 full pages. Okay, 2 pages means 2 full pages, not 1 page and then like a sentence on page 2. 2 full pages. Those are 2 double-spaced pages, though. And you're going to have and when you do it, you're going to consciously select a structure that's either more like Russell Baker's, which is select one important person. Whoops. One important person or event. Okay. Or you're going to do more like Christina Larimer's essay, which is more of a historical overview. If you've got a lot to say, a lot that you feel like has made up who you are as a reader and a writer, has shaped who you are as a reader and a writer, then maybe you go with the historical overview. Okay. Just a reminder, this is a narrative descriptive essay. So tell me a story, be honest. Okay. Don't just lie to me and tell me you love English. If that's not true, I want to know the truth in the essay because it's autobiographical. So tell me a story and give me lots of good specific details. I want to be able to imagine myself into your shoes. Part of this is helping me understand where you are as a reader and a writer at this point in your reading and writing journey. I want to understand where you are at this point. Okay. And this is a example of what your first page should look like. How you want to format that first page. Name, class, my name, assignment on the left, and then follow what you have here. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to post this to Blackboard so you have it. So you have these slides to look at. If you need anything else, let me know. And otherwise, I will see you in class on Wednesday. Okay. Thanks, everyone.